And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word, another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, May 8th, 2020, and we are marching ever so fast to Pentecost, just a few weeks away. We'll talk about that in future programs, but today we got a very important program. As we mentioned last week, we told you we were going to talk about China and leveling the playing field. Some of the information you see today is actually going to startle you, and we're going to use a lot of video today. And something we haven't done in quite a while is tell you the story of what we want to bring to you by using news clips and video clips and little snippets here and there to bring you the information we're going to share with you. So we'll be using a lot more video today than we've used in the past. And we'll take that information to show you how all of this is beginning to change the way people think in America. And then we'll follow up with targeting the religious fundamentalists. As you know that we've talked about this in the past on News and Nuggets. I've also covered it in my sermon this past week, and we'll follow through on that today right here on this program. So we've got a lot of information, so let's get right to it. So before we get into all of that, let's take a moment here to wish all the mothers out there a very happy Mother's Day. So from all of us here at News, Nuggets, and Insights and God's Unchanging Word, happy Mother's Day. Hope you have a very blessed and very safe Mother's Day. It's going to be different, but I hope you have a blessed Mother's Day anyway. All right, let's get right into our program. All right, a couple of the short news stories first. This is kind of encouraging, what I wanted to start with today. 2 weeks ago, we talked about how oil was absolutely collapsing and some of the dangers that would bring about. The May contracts actually closed negative $37 a barrel, unheard of in the history of the nation. In fact, around the world, never heard of anything like that. Paying $37 to somebody to take the oil off your hands. So then last week we talked about the June contracts were moving in the same direction, and many people thought that they had the possibility of going into the negative also before the end of the month. However, with news that just came out, right? News that just came out, it took the low right around $12 a barrel for the June and began to move it up. So late last week, with the announcement of businesses finally beginning to open and the potential of success for a medication for COVID-19, things began to turn around for the oil. And so now, as of today, this is Tuesday where we're taping the program, as of today, oil is back up to $23.87 a barrel, almost double what it was last Tuesday. Now, this is amazing. I never thought I'd be here telling you I'm really happy to see oil going up. Now, they can't exist on $23 a barrel. Nobody can. I mean, it's really below what they need to operate on. But if it stays down here, if it keeps going up, then at least it can stabilize and give people hope that maybe things are turning around. So this is one of the outliers when you look at how things are doing in the economy. You follow the money, and this is one of the starting places. It's in the oil because they look ahead how much oil they're going to need to supply the needs of the world. So anyway, that's encouraging at this particular point in saying that maybe we've reached the bottom and things are going to begin to start turning around. So now, what a horrible story if you've been following this. The Samaritan's Purse, this is from Franklin Graham. This is one of his programs that he has. They go around the world as a hospital, a Christian hospital, to try to help the need of people who don't have the funds or emergencies. So just this past week from Central Park, after New York City Councilman's vile message, and this is unbelievable, and this is one of the things we've been talking about, how all of this begins to focus on a spiritual nature and targeting things for churches. So we'll talk a lot about that today. We got a couple of videos from Tucker Carlson in his program, how he's isolated a few of these things. So we're going to use a couple of his news bits also. So here's a rant, I guess you could say the guy went on. He said, "It's time for the Samaritan's Purse to leave New York City." Johnson said in a statement, "This group, which is led by the notoriously bigoted, hate-spewing Franklin Graham, came in a time when the city couldn't in good conscience turn away any offer of help." He said, that time's past. Now, think about this. A man who's trying to help because he has a belief that doesn't agree with homosexuality and gay marriage and doesn't agree with abortion, To call it hatred and bigotry? Unbelievable. So he says, but now, the time for help, it's over. Look what he says. He goes on. As a city that values diversity and compassion for all but the bigoted conservative Christians who don't believe in what he believes in, says we cannot continue to allow a group with a track record of the Samaritan's purse to remain here when we are past the point that they are no longer needed, he continued. Hate has no place in our beautiful city. Wow. I don't know. It sounded like the whole context of that message was hate. So it's the self-righteousness of people who doesn't agree with them is unbelievable. Now but it's important. You know, I'm telling you why I'm bringing this out is because of standing for an opposition against the left, going against the godless in the nature of the leadership around the country. You're going to see this continue to grow. When I was taping a lot of this stuff on Sunday, I began for the first time to feel and to see what I saw that the movies brought out in pre-World War II Germany and how the hatred against the Jews began to magnify. How moving the concept of a news media to go after a certain type of people, how the mind of the people in general began to use that hate to target a certain people. We're going to see before this is all over, because the Bible says that Satan is going to go after the elect before it's all over. You're going to begin to see all of this hatred now begin to solidify to go after the very basic principles of the fundamental foundation of God's holy word. So when you see these things begin to come to pass, I'm going to bring them out as often as I can to show you how the change in the mindset of the people in this great nation is rapidly deteriorating. So now, let's go on. Round one goes to the church. So I finally got to bring a great story here. This is really good. The Department of Justice sides with the church, suing Virginia Governor Northam after the pastor who had 16 people in service was faced with a fine and jail. His pastor decided to go ahead and have a church, safe distance, and they came in to arrest him. The U.S. Justice Department is siding with the Lighthouse Fellowship Church in Chinookee, I don't know if I got that right, Island, Virginia, in a suit filed against Governor Ralph Northam. The pastor was being suing for discrimination against the church in a violation of the First Amendment. All right, so that's what it was. So the church sued after its pastor, Kevin Wilson, was criminally cited for holding a Palm Sunday service in violation of the state's coronavirus lockdown orders. Now, my point is, I understand we don't keep Palm Sunday, we don't keep Sunday worship. It was the point of the church and religion. That's what we're talking about here. And we come under that umbrella when we look at the nation, even though we have different beliefs. So if they can do it to him, they can certainly do it to our little churches that's scattered around. So he filed a lawsuit and faced with a $2,500 fine and possible jail time after he was found by police for holding service for 16 people inside a sanctuary that holds about 300. Now you got to see how spread out that's got to be to have 16 people in that little church. But they literally went in, they arrested him. He was going to face jail time and a fine of $2,500. Nevertheless, other places in businesses all around the state, they have an opportunity to operate. Grocery stores and certain businesses, they're all doing it with more than 16 people in there. So this is showing you how there's a target, and you'll see there's a theme that's been developed over the last couple of months, how the theme seems to isolate churches and then go after them. As God says, he says, you're the light of the world. And it's like Satan runs around, he looks for that light, and he just goes and targets those lights. And so they won the victory. In other words, the Department of Justice finally sided with them. First Amendment of the Constitution. Here's what the Constitution says, the amendment. The Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So under the Constitution, everything that you're hearing today from governors, from mayors, from senators, from representatives, they have no right, according to the Constitution, to tell any church anywhere in this country when and how they can operate, regardless of the pandemic. The Constitution says, let me read it again, the Congress shall make no law representing the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So anytime a church decides they want to go to church, they have the right, according to the Constitution, and there's no law that can stop them. Of course, that's a battle that's got to be fought right now. So, or, then it goes on, abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. All right, so what's really, really powerful about this First Amendment and the Constitution is that when God established this nation, he gave the wisdom and the insight to the founders of the nation. It says, it appears that the founders understood that the First Amendment was written to give us the freedom to be able to observe the very first commandment that God gave us, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So here we are now, and the reason you're seeing the churches being targeted is because of this right here. Once this Constitution is removed or dissolved or modified, where the churches no longer have the freedom and the protection of the Constitution, you will see the work come under attack that we have never seen in modern times. That's where all this is going, and that's why you're seeing everything seem to be focused around the battle between the amendment, the lockdowns, and the church. Not other places, it's the church. Who'd have thought? All right, so now let's track the spread and then we'll get back into our story. We're moving in from April. We started following from April 7th with 76,000 deaths. And coming through here, I'm not going to go all into this in much detail because you've been following that day by day and week by week in the news. But I want to show you the big changes here. We were averaging running around 40 to 45,000 deaths and about 400,000 new cases every single month around the world. April 21st, they had 171,000 deaths with just under 2.5 million cases. Right, that was just a couple weeks ago. Then last week on Tuesday morning, it went to over 3 million. So you see, just again, a little over 500,000 cases, 211,000 deaths, and that's again another about 40,000. And it seems to be holding pace again this week. 252,000 deaths, which again is another 41,000 deaths, and approximately 500,000 new cases around the world. So it kind of seems like it's leveled off as far as still a lot. I mean, that's a lot around the world, but it hasn't gotten a lot worse. Here in the United States, they're predicting recently now, by as much as June 1st, there could be 100,000 cases a day or 3,000 deaths a day by June 1st here in America. So I don't know where that's going to be, if that's true or not, but most of their targeting has not been accurate, but it's getting up there, even here in the United States. So now, let's get to where all this is going and possibly where it came from. What I want to do today is I want to bring the what if. All right, so what if, all right, there's no way that we know right now, and the camps are out. I mean, there's a big discrepancy between the left and the right of what China did, whether it was manufactured, whether they deliberately did it, it was an accident. I mean, it's all over the board out there right now. So what my point is today is to bring you the what if, because there's a lot of what if that's out there that says this could have been orchestrated, whether they made it by man or not. What's going on here is that when you follow the pattern of what's taking place, it ought to shock us. So if you were China, all right, so here's our what if. And I have been under the thumb of the United States and this administration for the last 3 years. And I'm having in my country the worst time I've had in 67 years. And we're watching our reserves drying up. We're watching our respect from the world being put the thumb on it. What would I do? Well, if you follow the news and what's taking place and some of the warnings, it may have been given to them the way to level the playing field, especially against the United States. All right, so now we're going to take that scenario today and we're going to put it to fact of things that literally happened and a time frame to show you. Now, whether they actually did it or not on purpose, I don't know. But if that was them and there was a way to do it, would they take that opportunity? Well, you decide. So if China wanted to get back at the United States, what would they do? So I'm going to show you today, I've taken excerpts out of what's called Event 201. So write that down. If you want to see all the news about Event 201, just type it into the internet, Event 201 2019, and you're going to bring up a lot of information and a bunch of videos. So I've got about a 6-minute clip that I put together to show you what they did in this exercise is that they brought in 15 of the top experts in the field of finance, of medical, of the viruses, put them all together, and they played like a war game. So, and they say, okay, here's the virus, it took place, and then they give them the scenario, what happened, and they had to sit down and figure out how to resolve what's going to take place, and they showed them how it's going to grow day by day, week by week, and month by month. Is exactly what happened with this virus, is what they were looking at. I'm going to show you little clips about what they went through and how they were supposed to be able to correct the problem. Then we're going to talk about the possibility of China intentionally letting it out, and then finally we'll talk about the after effects of leveling the playing field of what's going on in America. So let's get right into that. The recent outbreaks, let's begin with what were they looking at the beginning. We know we had a SARS corona. This is another coronavirus that took place in 2003. So we got that going on. Then Ebola broke out. Then that broke out, actually Ebola began in the I believe it was the late 1970s or 80s, but then they had more recent outbreaks even here in the United States in 2013 and 14. And because of that, 2013 and 14, they began to have exercises on the possibility. We got a video from Bill Gates to tell us what would be coming. All right, so they first discovered the Ebola in 1976. The most recent outbreak was in 2014. Then, planning for the future, the virus outbreak, we got this video with Bill Gates. So now we want to begin here, knowing China is involved in every one of these exercises. They have a representative. So if they want to know what's going to happen and how things are going to move, all they have to do is attend these seminars, which are limited to certain people. So in 2015, Bill Gates, and you find Bill Gates in the middle of everything. He is in the middle of everything, his foundations. So now, let's play this video. We played it a few weeks back, and watch what he's talking about. This was in 2015. All right, let's play the video, and I'll be right back.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Now, part of the reason for this is that we have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence. But we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready for the next epidemic. You can have a virus where people feel well enough while they're infectious that they get on a plane or they go to a market. The source of the virus could be a natural epidemic like Ebola, or it could be bioterrorism. And so there are things that would literally make things 1,000 times worse. In fact, let's look at a model of a virus spread through the air like the Spanish flu back in 1918. So here's what would happen. It would spread throughout the world very, very quickly. And you can see there's over 30 million people die from that epidemic. So this is a serious problem. We should be concerned. But in fact, we can build a really good response system. We have the benefits of all the science and technology that we talk about here. We've got cell phones to get information from the public and get information out to them. We have satellite maps where we can see where people are and where they're moving. We have advances in biology that should dramatically change the turnaround time to look at a pathogen and be able to make drugs and vaccines that fit for that pathogen. So we can have tools, but those tools need to be put into an overall global health system, and we need preparedness. The best lessons, I think, on how to get prepared are, again, what we do for war. For soldiers, we have full-time waiting to go. We have reserves that can scale us up to large numbers. NATO has a mobile unit that can deploy very rapidly. NATO does a lot of war games to check, are people well trained? Do they understand about fuel and logistics and the same radio frequencies? So they are absolutely ready to go. So those are the kinds of things we need to deal with an epidemic. What are the key pieces? First is we need strong health systems in poor countries. That's where mothers can give birth safely, kids can get all their vaccines, but also where we'll see the outbreak very early on. We need a medical reserve corps, lots of people who've got the training and background who are ready to go with the expertise. And then we need to pair those medical people with the military, taking advantage of the military's ability to move fast, do logistics, and secure areas. We need to do simulations, germ games, not war games, so that we see where the holes are. The last time a germ game was done in the United States was back in 2001, and it didn't go so well. So far, the score is germs 1, people 0. Finally, we need lots of advanced R&D in areas of vaccines and diagnostics. There are some big breakthroughs, like adeno-associated virus, that could work very, very quickly. Now, I don't have an exact budget for what this would cost, but I'm quite sure it's very modest compared to the potential harm. The World Bank estimates that if we have a worldwide flu epidemic, global wealth will go down by over $3 trillion, and we'd have millions and millions of deaths. These investments offer significant benefits beyond just being ready for the epidemic. The primary health care, the R&D, those things would reduce global health equity and make the world more just as well as more safe. So I think this should absolutely be a priority. There's no need to panic. We don't have to hoard cans of spaghetti or go down into the basement. But we need to get going because time is not on our side. In fact, if there's one positive thing that can come out of the Ebola epidemic, it's that it can serve as an early warning, a wake-up call to get ready. If we start now, we can be ready for the next epidemic. Thank you.
Sound familiar? Looking back is almost prophetic, isn't it? Well, following that, the United States and Dr. Fauci's organization, WHO, literally America put in millions of dollars into research into these viruses and these germs and moved them into studying in China. Just happens to be one of the places they did it was in Wuhan at the same time. So now, while all this is going on, they're beginning to research, pouring in millions of dollars into research. They began to consider how they'd play war games, their germ games that was going on. In the middle of this, when it all came out, one of the leading scientists who began to research this virus, who was a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, discovered the HIV virus, says coronavirus was created in a laboratory. Now, I know there's arguments that are out there that says that it was not created in a laboratory. There are people saying it's legitimate. It was actually from nature itself. At this particular time, there's no way to actually to understand what was going on there. But he said, and he is a very highly significant development, Professor Luc Montagnier, which is the French scientist who shared the 2008 Nobel Prize for Medicine and discovered in human immune deficiency virus, the HIV, has added his voice to those who believe that the new coronavirus was created in a laboratory. He said there's growing evidence that this was designed, COVID-19. Montagnier suggested that the possible goal had been to make an AIDS vaccine, a type of AIDS vaccine that would be used for corona. He said, so they might have been doing research in it. He's not trying to say that it was deliberate, and I'm going to play a video here in just a second, but it's in French, so you're going to have to read the writing on it, but it's very significant what he says. So he says it's possible there was an AIDS vaccine, labeling the virus as, but he labeled it as a professional job, very meticulous. He described its genome as being a clockwork of sequences. So in other words, when he looked at it, he looked at there were certain things that are natural, but in the sequence of things, there's something that had been inserted in that sequence which is not natural. So let's play his video right now.
Ce qui m'intéresse ce matin, c'est que vous travaillez en ce moment sur le virus. Nous sommes d'accord.
Je travaille, mais pas forcément au labo, puisque on travaille sur ordinateur avec un collègue, et puis c'est tout. On n'a pas d'expérience, on peut dire, mais l'expérience vient de la maladie elle-même, de toutes les mesures qui sont faites actuellement dans les laboratoires sur les patients.
Et vous êtes arrivé à certaines conclusions.
Alors, nous sommes arrivés à la conclusion qu'effectivement, il y avait eu une manipulation au sujet de ce virus.
C'est-à-dire?
Eh bien, qu'une partie, je ne dis pas le total, n'est-ce pas, mais il y a un modèle qui est évidemment le virus classique, et là c'était un modèle surtout venant de la chauve-souris, mais à ce modèle, on a par-dessus ajouté des séquences notamment du VIH, le virus du sida.
Mais quand vous dites « on a ajouté », qui a ajouté?
Ah, moi, je ne sais pas.
Mais c'est pas naturel, c'est ce que vous voulez dire?
Non, ce n'est pas naturel. C'était un travail de professionnel, un travail de biologiste moléculaire. C'est un travail très minutieux, on peut dire d'horloger, on peut dire au niveau des séquences.
Mais dans quel but?
Dans quel but, ça n'est pas clair. Moi, j'expose, si vous voulez, mon travail, c'est d'exposer les faits, c'est tout. Je n'accuse personne, je ne sais pas qui a fait ça et pourquoi.
The interview is quite lengthy in the interview, and what he's trying to say is, in short, is that I'm not trying to blame anybody. He says it's not my job to blame them. He says, and it's not my job to say intentionally what they did. He said my job is simply to tell you what happened, what it is, and that's what he was doing there. He also goes on to say in the interview that he says other famous scientists around the world have come to the same conclusions. So the newscaster says, yeah, he said, but they've backed off from those conclusions. He said they've backed off because of pressure, because of the funding for their organizations and their governments. He says, I'm an old man, what can they do to me? He says, but we all have the same conclusions. It's very interesting what he says, so you'd have to read the whole thing. Now, knowing that there's something going on, that it was told in 2015 that we need research, we need studies, we need germ games, and we need to be able to develop vaccines. You see that there's something going on. They were trying to develop a vaccine. All right, then a game, a war game, a germ game. It's called Event 201. Event 201 was a pandemic tabletop exercise hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health and Security in partners with World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It was actually held October 18th, 2019. Now pay attention now. October 18th, 2019. That's just a few months before the end of the year when this virus broke out. Now, these people sitting at that table that you see in this picture here, those people are the leaders from around the world. And this was an all-day exercise of what they would do if a germ outbreak took place like this virus. Now, if you live in the South and you live in a city that has potential for flooding, like we have here in New Orleans, if you're down in Miami, the cities, they run test case scenarios. Okay, if a hurricane's moving in, what will happen? And then they run those exercises to see how they would be prepared if these things happen. So now, following Bill Gates saying what they need to do, by 2019 now, their first war game, so to speak, it's a germ game, actually took place, bring in the leaders and say, this is what's going to happen, because they've already spent 4 years of research. They got the records from 1918 of what took place back then and how it spreads, and now they know what they're going to have, so now they bring it out. And who is at that table? China, as well as others. So now, let's play this video. It's about 6 minutes long, and what I've done is I've taken out sequences of a longer video to show you the exercises of what they were asked and the possibilities of what they would have to face. And when you go through this, see if it doesn't sound like exactly what the United States and the rest of the world has been doing to try to combat this virus. All right, let's play that video.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
The mission of the Pandemic Emergency Board is to provide recommendations to deal with the major global challenges arising in response to an unfolding pandemic. The board is comprised of highly experienced leaders from business, public health, and civil society.
We could be looking at double the number of cases in 1 week and 16 times as many in a month if we are not able to stop the spread. That would be on the order of 500,000 cases, and it would continue to rise exponentially. In 3 months, we could be approaching 10 million cases.
We're at the start of what's looking like it will be a severe pandemic. And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and governments working together. So the policy crisis in question for this board in this meeting is this: how should governments, business, and international organizations allocate and distribute pandemic antivirals and medical supplies to the people who need the most?
Global stockpile would certainly help ensure more rational and strategic allocation, but the reality is that we don't have the logistics capability, even within the UN, to bring that together in one place and run it. So,
public health agencies have issued travel advisories, while some countries have banned travel from the worst affected areas. As a result, the travel sector is taking a huge hit. Travel bookings are down 45%, and many flights have been canceled. A ripple effect is racing through the service sector. Governments that rely on travel and tourism as a large part of their economies are being hit particularly hard.
How should national leaders, businesses, and international organizations balance the risk of worsening disease that would be caused by the continued movement of people around the world against the risks of profound economic consequence of travel and trade bans?
If there's some sense that there's a UN institution that can do all of this, then I worry we're suffering from a delusional disorder on the power of the UN.
We are not out of money yet. But the fact is we are trending in a dangerous direction and something needs to change.
So the policy question for this board now is how should financial resources be prioritized? Are there nodes that we cannot allow to fail? What is your sense of priorities? We don't have money to pay for all of these urgent problems.
So at the moment, we want the funds, right? You need the money. So where's the money? So government kind of supplies some money.
Governments need to be willing to do things that are out of their historical perspective, or for the most part, it's really a war footing that we need to be on.
We shouldn't underestimate the power of entrepreneurship. We need to escalate that, whether it's through the government's helping with tax breaks or subsidies of that nature to increase manufacturing of those types of products. It can happen quickly. A Marshall-type plan, don't mean to say that exactly, but a Marshall Plan that can go into effect can stimulate change very quickly.
Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
How much control of information should there be, and by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged? And what if that false information is coming from companies or from governments?
I think it's very important that we make sure that there is concise communication with all healthcare facilities where these patients are being treated so that there isn't mass panic.
We're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over.
One thing we haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news.
The outcome of the CAPS pandemic in Event 201 was catastrophic. 65 million people died in the first 18 months. The outbreak was small at first and initially seemed controllable, but then it started spreading in densely crowded and impoverished neighborhoods of megacities. From that point on, the spread of the disease was explosive. Within 6 months, cases were occurring in nearly every country. The global economy was in a free fall. The GDP down 11%. Stock markets around the world plummeted between 20 and 40% and headed into a downward cycle of fear and low expectation. Businesses were not borrowing, banks were not lending. Everyone was just hoping to hunker down and weather the storm. Economists say the economic turmoil caused by such a pandemic will last for years, perhaps a decade. The societal impacts, the loss of faith in government, the distrust of news, and the breakdown of social cohesion could last even longer. We have to ask, did this need to be so bad? Are there things we could have done in the 5 to 10 years leading up to the pandemic that would have lessened the catastrophic consequences? We believe the answer is yes. So, are we as a global community now finally ready to do the hard work needed to prepare for the next pandemic?
So, if you were China and you just left this seminar, you were just given every tool you need to level the playing field. But if you were going to use this as a weapon, you would have to move quickly before everything they learned in this exercise was put into play to prevent the pandemic from spreading around the world. So now, let's take it from there. 1 month later, just 1 month after this exercise, there's a quiet outbreak in China. So now, it takes anywhere from 14 to 23 days from the time a person acquires the disease before it actually breaks out and becomes seen or even goes into a hospital state. Sometime in late November, they began experiencing some of their problems. Wasn't noted till December, but by December, it had grown to the point it actually began to spread to other countries. January 23rd, Wuhan and 3 other cities go into lockdown. There's a news the news media is not allowed in. No information is allowed to come out, and then the scientists from around the world are not allowed to come in. They stop moving within the China itself out of these provinces into the rest of China. But the next day, the very next day, January 24th to the 30th, millions of people from China began to move out of China to the rest of the world. Lockdown China, spread to the rest of the world. By February, they was beginning to gain speed and spreading around the world. By March, everything they learned in Event 201 has happened exactly and precisely the way they predicted it would take place. And the rest of the world now is paying the price from that time. An accident? I don't know. It doesn't look like it is an accident, but time will tell where it's at. By April, the entire world goes into a shutdown, and we are in the economic disaster that you've seen them portray would take place if we had another pandemic. And it is actually here, just as they said it was. The only difference in this is they predicted $3 trillion in debt and millions of debt. What the world has opted to do is shut the world down, raise the debt, and drop the deaths. That's the only difference. And the way they knew to do that, because they were at the seminar and they would learn exactly how it was going to take place. All right, so now let's take it from there. All right, that's the physical. Let's take a look at what's going on with the spiritual, the emotion, the freedom, the thought process in America, and how fast that's changing. So what I've got here is I've got 2 videos from Tucker Carlson talking about the massive changes in our freedom. In the 2 videos, it talks about the locking down of the freedoms in America, how we're willingly just giving them up. And the second is the assault on the churches, or the religious aspects of what's taking place. Now, both of these are just short clips from Tucker Carlson, and there's a lot more to it than this, and we'll bring more of those in future programs, but just limited space. So let's play the first video now.
Totalitarianism does not shock us anymore. Maybe that's because all of a sudden it's all around us. You may have seen this tape already. If not, you've likely seen many more like it in the past few weeks. 2 armed officers arrive at a family's home in Wisconsin. Someone has reported the mother to police for arranging a play date for her daughter. That's now a crime. Here's what happened next.
Are you aware that we're in a stay-at-home order right now?
Yeah, obviously.
By the government?
Yes, I am aware.
Okay, you're aware of that?
I am aware.
So I don't need to explain that to you?
Why are you here?
Because your daughter is going to play at other people's home and you're allowing it to happen. Stop having your kid go by other people's home.
Are we done here?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Your middle initial and your last name.
I'm not giving it to you. I haven't done anything wrong.
Okay.
I already
Perfect.
got it.
We got it.
Yeah,
okay.
And that'll be documented too, that you're uncooperative.
You are uncooperative. That will be documented. Notice the tone they strike with this mother. They are standing on her property, uninvited, hectoring her about the so-called crime of allowing her daughter to play outside the house. They're not apologizing for this. They're not embarrassed to be carrying out an order that has no basis in science. They are utterly self-confident. They treat her with pure contempt like a peasant. And later, the Calumet County Sheriff's Department posted an account of what happened on their Facebook page. In it, they refer to that mother's mobile home 6 times. Just, she lives in a mobile home. Oh, just a prole, just a peasant. Shut up and obey. Who cares what she thinks? They believe they have the right to do that. The question is, where exactly do they get that right? That's a good question. It's a question that we are strongly discouraged from asking. The short answer is governors told them they could. Never in American history have politicians been more powerful than they are now. Effectively, they are gods.
Wow. I mean, it was like, I tell you what the chilling thing was, because it was almost like a line out of a movie when I was researching and studying Germany pre-World War II. And I keep referring to Germany all the time, but this is what it's like. We don't have a lot else to compare it to in modern times. The fact that the woman says, we're also going to write down that you are uncooperative. I don't know why that was so chilling, but it was. Is people in Germany who were uncooperative were thrown in prison and quite often never seen again. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, uncooperative. All right, let's play the second one.
For 250 years, Americans have enjoyed the unfettered right to practice their faith as they choose. Now they don't. It happened overnight. Last month, Christians across the country were legally prohibited from celebrating Easter in their own churches. The national media barely noted it. How exactly is this happening? Well, it turns out that's not clear. Strangely, not very many people have asked. Politicians have no right to do any of this. They cannot make it illegal for people to go to religious services. The Constitution of the United States expressly prohibits that. The words could not be clearer. The First Amendment explicitly prevents government from making any law that inhibits the exercise of religious faith. That's not a detail or a footnote. It is a cornerstone of our history and of our legal system. Millions of people, probably your ancestors, fled to this country from around the world precisely because our Bill of Rights gave them this guarantee. It's why this country was founded. And in a moment, it's gone. How? Where did politicians get the authority to do this? Because some elderly, power-drunk epidemiologist told them to do it? That's not how our system works. It can't work that way. Occasionally, you hear someone complain about this. Some lonely civil libertarian will fret that we may be on a slippery slope toward losing our rights. If only. We're already there. We've slid to the bottom of that slope. Our rights are gone. No one has explained how politicians are allowed to do this. Where's the authority come from? How can they override the Constitution? Nobody seems to care. They're too afraid. But if you think this moment is scary, consider what might come next. Now that we've ceded all authority in the country to our political leaders, what can't they do? What are the limits to their power? That's not a theoretical question. It's not an argument over philosophy or political theory. It is the most practical possible question. The answer will define where this country goes next. What can't politicians do in the name of public health? As it stands, politicians won't let people worship or work or go to school or see their aging parents. They've placed the nation under house arrest. That's happening today, right now. But let's say we all get more afraid. What then? What couldn't they start doing? Could they intern people? Seriously. You can dismiss the possibility of that if you like, but remember that just a few months ago, most of us would have dismissed as ludicrous the possibility that propaganda-spewing drones would be hovering above. Now we have them. So what's next? What can't they do? Let's draw a line at some point.
You know, for years I wondered when I read Matthew 24, where they talked about brother turning against brother, and where Jesus Christ says they're going to drag you before the magistrates. You wonder how in the world that's going to happen in America. Well, you don't have to wonder anymore because it's here. Now cities around the country have what they call tell on others who are not doing what they're supposed to. And as you referred to in that video, there's actually drones now who are flying around with loudspeakers on them, telling people to distance themselves. It's quite frightening when you see what's actually going on. And you begin to see the power overreach, the overreach of certain government officials to lay down laws and mandates that just absolutely are horrendous when you hear how they're saying with the absolute hatred that they have. So I recommend everybody continue to follow through and understand the change in the mindset of the nature of the people. For example, right here, the next story. Public officials are overstepping in Kansas City, Missouri. Now, I don't know if you've seen this yet or not, but this one is out of the box. I got a feeling it'll be overturned at this particular state. But like I told you, I keep referring back to Germany. Remember what Germany did before World War II and how they went after the Jews. What was one of the things they had to do? You had to report if you were a Jew and have it written down so they can monitor what you were doing and where you were going. Now, with that said, pay attention to the article here. All right, so now, with all that said now, let's begin to pay attention to what's going on here. Surveillance of members, right? This is Kansas City. Church attendees must register with the government or face closure and jail. All right? Church members, not hardware stores or banks, grocery stores, churches. Church members have to register with the government. As Kansas City begins reopening, the local government is requiring every church who wishes to have services to turn in a detailed list of every person who enters their building during services, including the name, phone number, and addresses so city officials can use it for surveillance and tracking purposes. Now, what does that tell you? All right, so failure to comply, you ready for this? Failure to comply will result in up to 6 months in jail and the church being completely shut down. Now, if that doesn't sound like China or Russia or Iran or some other country, that's America, simply because you didn't register. Them Christians, they're the problem. Violation of any provision of this order results in steep penalties. According to the government's announcement, failure to comply, listen to this, constitutes an immediate threat, creates an immediate menace to public health, and shall be considered a violation of Section 5-0144 of the city's Code of Ordinances. Now, I'm not making this up. That is going on right now in Kansas City. This is unbelievable where this is coming from. Now, same story from another perspective. This is from WorldNet Daily. City demands churches turn over their names, addresses, and phone numbers. Governors and mayors across the nation have claimed that their emergency powers allow them to ban large groups during the pandemic. They don't want groups gathering in malls, movie theaters, or even churches, despite the constitutional protection of religious rights. Now, one official is moving into extreme territory, demanding churches provide him with the names, addresses, and telephone numbers of anyone who shows up to worship. That's unbelievable. They're going to have police at the door? They're going to be wearing brown shirts like they did in Germany? I don't know. But this kind of stuff has now been moved in and is almost becoming the norm in many people's eyes across the nation. And they're doing it for the welfare and the health of our nation. Well, what about the rest of the businesses? Why is it churches? Well, we know that, and we know why it's going that way. The Germans did the very same thing to the Jews, collecting all the names and locations of the known synagogues and attendees in the early days of the Nazi regime. So when they had everything they needed, when it was time to be able to exercise against the Jews, just like in Kristallnacht, they had everything they had in place to go after whoever they wanted to go after. Let that sink in for a moment. All right, so now when we come back, we're going to go into targeting now the religious fundamentalists and showing you how that has been changing. But let's take a break. Let's take a look at Mother's Day. A little humor in the middle of all of this. I'll be right back.
Coming soon. Only one hero can save her family and prevent disaster.
Mom, we're gonna be late for school!
I don't think so. Whoa.
Experience the phenomenon that critics are calling inspiring.
Mom, I can't find number 17!
Come on, Billy! Dig deep!
A lot of fun. And pure genius.
Mom, where's my phone?
Table.
Keys.
Mudroom.
Dragon Man?
Under the couch between the monkey and the flip-flop.
How does she do that?
Created by God to demonstrate his love with grace, elegance, and poise.
Hey, honey, have you seen my butane torch?
Welcome back. I hope you love that video. I love that little video. It is so funny. The second one's even funnier. All right, so now let's get right into our program now. Let's get into targeting the religious fundamentalists. Eventually, this is where it's all going. Satan's going after God's elect, which falls into that category. We talked about this a couple months ago in News and Nuggets. Pope Francis declares that Christian fundamentalists are a scourge, as he calls them. And this is actually a report that came out of a Catholic newspaper talking the fundamentalist plague by the Pope. He said, beware of the fundamentalist groups. Everyone has his own. In Argentina, too, they're a little fundamentalist corner. Let us try with fraternity to go forward. Fundamentalism is a scourge, and our religions have some kind of fundamentalist first cousin there, which forms a group. So what he's trying to say is those people are a problem. We need to go past these people, and we need to become a group, right? This is what they're talking about. Another word for scourge is plague. That's actually a word for it. So when you see around the nation, they're going after these churches, they're going after a religious plague. You know, we got to do something about these religious people out there. So now, Bill Gates began back in 2005 talking about the fundamentalists, and this is called FunVac. It's a FunVac seminar. I played it in a sermon this past Saturday. In case you missed it, I'm going to play it again here. It's only about 4.5 minutes long, but it's terrifying to see what they're doing behind the scenes. Let's play that video, and I'll be back to explain it.
We have individuals who are religious fundamentalists, religious fanatics, and this is the expression, RT-PCR, real-time PCR expression of the VMAT2 gene. Over here, we have individuals. So let me complete. So over here, we have individuals who are not particularly fundamentalist, not particularly religious, and you can see there's a much reduced expression of this particular gene, the VMAT2 gene. Another evidence that supports our hypothesis for the development of this approach.
What you're suggesting here is that by spreading this virus, we're going to eliminate individuals from donning on a bomb vest and going into a market and blowing up the market.
So our hypothesis is that these are fanatical people, that they have overexpression of the VMAT2 gene, and that by vaccinating them against this, we'll eliminate this behavior. So we have some very, very remarkable data in this next slide. Here we have two brain scans. These are fMRIs. These are two different individuals with different levels of expression of VMAT2. On top is an individual who's a religious fanatic, an individual, and we've repeated this numerous times, that has high levels of VMAT2. Now, this individual down here who had low levels of the VMAT2 gene, this individual would self-describe as not particularly religious. In each case, these individuals were read a religious text. This individual lit up the right middle frontal gyrus, shown here, and that's a part of the brain that's associated with theory of mind. It's a part of the brain that has to do with intents and beliefs and desires. In marked contrast, here's an individual who would not particularly self-describe as religious, and when they're read a religious text, what you see is that this part of the brain called the anterior insula lights up. This is a part of the brain that's associated with disgust or displeasure on hearing something.
So you're suggesting I take a CT scan with me when I'm evaluating people to determine whether I put a bullet in their head?
So the data that I'm presenting here supports the concept that we're proposing, and I think that we would not propose to do CT scans or fMRIs on individuals out in the hinterlands of Afghanistan. The virus would immunize against this VMAT2 gene, and that would have the effect that you see here, which is it's essentially to turn a fanatic into a normal person. And we think that will have major effects in the Middle East.
How would you suggest that this is going to be dispersed? The aerosol?
Well, so the present plan and the tests that we've done so far have used respiratory viruses such as flu or rhinoviruses, and we believe that that's a satisfactory way to get the exposure of the largest part of the population. Most of us, of course, have been exposed to both of those viruses, and we're quite confident that this will be a very successful approach.
This is fascinating. What's the name of this proposal?
Yeah, so the name of this project is FunVax, which is the vaccine for religious fundamentalism.
And you have a proposal already?
The proposal has just been submitted, and I think that the data that I have shown you today would support the development of this project, and we think it has great promise.
Great promise. FunVac. It sounds like, whoa, let's all get together and play a game. FunVac. Now, I don't know if you heard it or not, but this is this is actually at the Pentagon. They were given this report. And one of the gentlemen says, you suggest we take a brain scan with us, and when we scan somebody and we see it all lit up, we take and put a bullet in his head? I mean, you just heard it. I mean, you have to go back and listen again. But that's what he said. It's kind of real low, but it's there. It's like, wow. Now, granted, this was talking about targeting the people who were blowing up, you know, the Muslim people, terrorists all around the world. But today it's changed. Fundamentalism isn't just talking about Muslims. It's talking about people like you and me. The Pope just says every corner's got one, and we need to do something about it. Fundamentalist vaccination or fundamentalist vaccine, FunVac is the name of that program. Now, let's carry it through to people who want to carry out some of this. It's the UN. The UN religion expert warns of world religions to bow to UN ideology. The United Nations expert on freedom of religion says it's time for the world leading religions to submit to the authority of the UN and its human rights bodies, even though critics say that these bodies are laced with fringe leftist views. It's all about who should have the final say on issues of law and policy, and the UN expert is saying that the UN ideas should override the beliefs of mainstream religions. Ahmed Shahid, who is the UN Special Rapporteur of freedom of religion or belief, wrote about how religion and gender equality have reached a class point in his annual report. Meanwhile, Shahid says that to flip freedom of religion upside down, saying the right to freedom of religion protects individuals and not religions as such. He then contends that laws based on traditional morality, which often come into religious roots, should be repealed, and if they conflict with the opinions of human rights scholars and the UN. So that means if you're a fundamentalist and your Bible beliefs are opposed from what the UN says they ought to be, then they're going to repeal them, and you're not going to be allowed to worship what you believe. Can you see how everything's merging? Pulling these pieces together, and they're moving ever so quickly. Now, when can that possibly take place? I got this one slide, and then we'll move on to close the program. We'd probably run it a little bit longer, but it had a lot of videos, and it was important to keep it all in one program right now to give you the overview of what's taking place. So the timeline of a future captivity, when that happens, it is a type of captivity when we have to submit to the UN rather than the Constitution. So now we're at a time when everything I began at 2017 is like the time of God launching the end time toward his return. So now we're here in 2020, and that the coronavirus now has spread around the world, and as we understood from the Rebirth of Israel series as we've gone through, is the first wave of captivity of ancient Israel was the removal of its wealth. Well, we're there. We are absolutely there right now. But the second wave is even as important. Before the seals, this is my opinion here, before these seals actually begin, I believe we'll be somewhere in this particular category, because when these things happen, you're not going to be allowed to do what you want to do. You're going to be forced to do what someone else tells you to do. All right, so what about this second wave of captivity? The second wave in ancient Israel was giving up its national governance. In other words, they were told by Assyria what they could and they could not do. No different than when I just read about the UN here. So when America chooses to relinquish its constitution, it will be the day that we begin to go into the second phase of captivity. Now, this is a heads up for everybody who's watching this program. We don't know when that is. But when this event takes place, whether it's the UN or some other body, and you can no longer do what you're told to do, you have just relinquished your freedom to something else. And then finally, the third wave was given to make war with the saints. That's where all of this is leading up to. And this is the final battle, when we talked about the civil war, the spiritual civil war coming. This is where it's all leading to. Satan to destroy God's plan and his firstborn. All right, let's begin to wrap this up. From the Home Office, May 8th. News and nuggets and insights from May 1st. That goes into what we're talking about today, so it's a great mix for what we got going on, and it ties in and connects with Lincoln's Lessons from Lincoln Part 2. All of this that we're working on today it's all merging together to tell one story. So if you're not on a mailing list yet, write in, get on the mailing list, and by all means, get these messages. And by the way, they're online. You can go to the website and you can view them anytime you want. All right, so everything's there and available for you absolutely free. Last week we put out the newsletter for a sermon I'm going to be giving in 2 weeks. It's Can God Call Good What He Has Declared Evil? It's going to be a powerful message talking about a concern for a revival that's coming this fall and what we need to look at and what God says to bring about repentance. Alrighty, from Syracuse, Indiana, as we begin to wrap our program up. We heard from Steve Council, and Indiana is opening up May 14th. So they're going back May 15th. The congregation is going to begin meeting. May 16th, they begin meeting on the Sabbath in the building in Syracuse, to let everybody know. Then at the end of the month, they're planning a big get-together, statewide, area-wide Pentecost weekend. So if you're interested, if you're in the area, contact Steve at 574-584-2001, or you can reach him at his email address, secouncil@comcast.net. And they've also made special arrangements for motel pricing to attend at the entire weekend. All right, that's it finally got it. My voice is about gone today for some reason, so you probably heard all of that. So here we are. The kids want to know, can you go out for the summer yet? Well, some places you can, some places you can't. So let's close our program out with the sequel to Mother's Day. Another great little video, and I'll be right back to close the program.
Last year, she amazed her family. But now,
Mom, my science project is due tomorrow.
Jeremy hates me.
when chaos strikes,
Mom, I want to play Xbox. No, it's my turn.
her true powers will be revealed.
Hey, honey, your mom said she's going to stop by later. Is that okay?
Do you hear that?
I don't hear anything.
Exactly.
I'm painting.
Natalie, what did you do?
How did she know?
Gifted by God with the power to read minds.
I don't have any homework.
No.
I mean, I did all my homework.
No.
Well, I did some of it.
No.
Fine, I haven't started yet.
There's the truth.
The wisdom to restore peace.
He said, that's it. We're finished. So sick of this texting.
What? Let me see that. Wait, this says sick of this testing, not texting.
Oh, right. He was taking the ACT. Thanks, Mom.
The insight to see the future.
I forgot to think of a science project.
Yeah, I thought you might.
Yes!
With a verse of unlimited capacity. And her secret weapon, the look.
Hey. Oh, come on, Billy.
These abilities combine to form the ultimate example of warmth, tenderness, and dignity. She is Mom.
How do you like my new ride?
Grandma!
Mom?
Well, after a tough program like today, you got to have something to pick up your spirits after that. Well, I hope you understand why we're covering these subjects. It's so important today. In the time we live, the environment that's changing, and how there's a spiritual lockdown coming, that God says there's going to be a famine of the Word. But before that happens, we're going to do everything in our power every week to bring out the Word of God. And with your help, we're beginning to reach some people, but we got a long way to go. Remember, every week, take whatever you get and share it with everybody you know. And they're going to love you for it, or not. Till next week, God be with you. Stay safe. See you then.